The relationship between grace and discipleship has been explored and debated throughout the history of the Church. It may be helpful in this section to consider Anabaptist views on discipleship in the light of the teachings of earlier movements. Sometimes the grace of God has been stressed to such an extent that there seemed to be little incentive to faithful discipleship. Sometimes the emphasis was so strongly on ethical behaviour that legalism prevented churches from enjoying liberty, and the possibility of forgiveness for sin seemed to have been forgotten and replaced with penitential discipline and condemnation. These issues were important to many movements in the medieval period, who tended to emphasise serious discipleship. Sometimes it would seem to the detriment of enjoying the grace of God. Among these were the Valdensian, Hussite and Lollard movements. Lutz Kalber summarises Valdensian and Hussite convictions on this issue. Works were to be understood as concrete acts in their daily life, and thus an immediate complement to and ultimate demonstration of their convictions. The idea of proof of faith in conduct, the active pursuit of sanctification, divine mission. This orientation reaches its concrete expression above all with the Valdensians, the call to evangelical and apostolic poverty. As is well known, this was the basic motive of the conversion of Valdez, the voluntary poverty of the wealthy merchant for the sake of the credibility of discipleship, and more importantly of proclamation. And Malcolm Lambert refers to a Lollard tract written by John Purvey, which describes the way of life of those who attended the established churches. Enjoying his theatres, wrestlers, buckler players, dancers and singers, dining and drinking by night and going to church afterwards, with the good ale rising into his brain and preventing him from noticing the false doctrine of the sermon. Lollard concerns about the low standards of parishioners and parish priests were shared widely in medieval England, and their criticism of such behaviour won a ready hearing for their evangelists. Lollard literature and preaching, like that of the Valdensians, was essentially a call for repentance and serious discipleship. Both movements were accused of Donatist views because of their criticism of morally deficient priests and refusal to accept that the sacraments could be validly dispensed by such men. The exploration of the principle of the priesthood of all believers in these movements was a further stage in this process. If discipleship was the main requirement, the way forward was to look for leadership to those living holy lives rather than to those representing a church that seemed uninterested in discipleship. The questions many movements were asking of themselves and the wider church were, first, what is the nature of discipleship? Second, is the church for saints or for sinners? Third, how can the purity of the church be maintained? Fourth, how should those who sin or deny their faith be dealt with? And fifth, what standards can be expected of church leaders? The Central Reformation insights of Sola Gratia and Sola Fide were vital to restore to the Church the scandalous teaching of the New Testament that justification depends not on works but on the grace of God appropriated by faith. The Anabaptist movement, while subscribing to these Reformation insights, was concerned lest the balance was being lost again in the opposite direction, and called for a life of discipleship. Which of these elements is dominant in your own spirituality, in your local church, in your denomination? How would you express the relationship between grace and discipleship, faith and works, freedom and obedience? These might be questions to bear in mind as you study this unit.